Welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast, where we explore the kind of thinking we need to navigate a positive way forward. I'm your host, Rhiannon Gamble, permaculture educator and global ambassador, filmmaker, ecovillager, food forester, mother, practivist, and all-round lover of thinking, communicating, and acting regeneratively. For a long time, it's been clear to me that to shift trajectory to a thriving one-planet way of life, we first need to shift our thinking. The way we perceive ourselves in relation to nature, self, and community is the core. So this is true now more than ever, and even the way change is changing. Unprecedented changes are happening all around us at a rapid pace. So how do we make sense of this? To know which way to turn, to know what action to focus on, so our efforts are worthwhile and nourishing and are working towards resilience, regeneration, and reconnection. What better way to make sense than to join together with others in open, generative conversation? In this podcast, I'll share conversations with my friends and colleagues, people who inspire and challenge me in their ways of thinking, connecting and acting. These wonderful people are thinkers, doers, activists, scholars, writers, leaders, farmers, educators, people whose work informs permaculture and spark the imagination of what a post-COVID, climate-resilient, socially just future could look like. Their ideas and projects help us to make sense in this changing world, to compost and digest the ideas, and to nurture the fertile ground for new ideas, connections and actions. Together we'll open up conversations in the world of permaculture design, regenerative thinking, community action, earth repair, eco-literacy and much more. I can't wait to share these conversations with you. Over the last 3 decades of personally making sense of the multiple crises we face, I always return to the practical and positive world of permaculture, with its ethics of earth care, people care and fair share. I've seen firsthand how adaptable and responsive it can be in all contexts, from urban to rural, from refugee camps to suburbs. It helps people make sense of what's happening around them and to learn accessible design tools to shape their habitat positively and to contribute to cultural and ecological regeneration. This is why I've created the Permaculture Educators Program, to help thousands of people to become permaculture teachers everywhere through an interactive online dual certificate of permaculture design and teaching. We sponsor global perma-youth programs, women's self-help groups in the Global South, and teens in refugee camps. So anyway, this podcast is sponsored by the Permaculture Education Institute and our Permaculture Educators Program. If you'd like to find more about permaculture, I've created a 4-part permaculture video series to explain what permaculture is and also how you can make it your livelihood as well as your way of life. We'd love to invite you to join our wonderfully inspiring, friendly and supportive global learning community. So I welcome you to share each of these conversations, and I'd also like to suggest you create a local conversation circle to explore the ideas shared in each show and discuss together how this makes sense in your local community and environment. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I meet and speak with you today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Last week on Sense Making in a Changing World, I spoke with Linda Woodrow, the permaculture author, who has just released a new book called 470, a permaculture novel actually in the genre of cli-fi. And this week on the show, I'm so delighted to be able to share with you my conversation with a dear friend, Kosha Joubert, who has led the global Ecovillage network for a number of years now. So this is a story of the global Ecovillage network, the different types of ecovillages around the world, and how ecovillages and ecovillage living helps us to make sense of the world that we're in today, and also how you can get involved in ecovillages too. So Kosha grew up in South Africa under apartheid and has ever since been dedicated to building bridges. She's lived in ecovillages herself for over 25 years in many parts of the world and has visited ecovillage projects in almost 50 countries. The network of ecovillages connects well over 6,000 different types of villages, from traditional villages, indigenous villages, urban villages, rural villages, all different kinds of projects and communities that are working towards a more ecological way of being. Now, Kosha is not only the CEO of the Global Ecovillage Network. She's also been the co-founder of Gaia Education, the co-author of the Ecovillage Design Education Program, author of a book Collective Wisdom, and editor of Ecovillage Solutions. She hosted the Power of Communities Summit last year, which attracted well over 10,000 participants, and I met her at a conference in Findhorn last year called the Climate Change and Consciousness Conference. So Kosha joined me on Zoom just recently to talk about the Global Ecovillage Network, her last podcast as the CEO of this organisation. I really hope that you enjoy this wonderful conversation with Kosha. It was an absolute delight to spend this time with her. So thank you so much for joining me on the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast, Kosha. It's been an absolute delight to get to know you through the Global Ecovillage Network. You've been living in an ecovillage in Findhorn on the other side of the world. Well, here I'm based at Crystal Waters, an ecovillage in Australia. And your role as CEO of the Global Ecovillage Network has taken you to so many different places and given you such deep insight about the world of ecovillages, the role that they've been playing, and the way that they're helping to transform communities. And I would just love to take this opportunity to explore with you a bit about what are ecovillages and what your insights in the time, of the last decade or so that you've been involved, and how you see that they can help to continue to transform and inform the way that we need to go, and particularly now when we're in these sort of cascading crises. What does the eco-village concept really help to, what does it offer into our world now to help us make more sense and move forward in a more resilient and regenerative way? So maybe let's begin with what is an eco-village? Maybe we should start there.
Yeah, hi Morag. Very lovely to meet you here in this space, and I'm delighted to be part of your series. Yeah, so what is an eco-village? Today we define it as a community, rural or urban, that is designed through participatory processes, so not by an outside developer, but really by the people who love the place in all 4 areas of regeneration: culture, economy, ecology, and social, for a whole system's pathway to a regenerative future. Mm-hmm. That's the definition that we developed after Robert Gilman had a beautiful, very complex definition that Jen was founded with, which you can easily find online. I don't have it in my head right now. But we actually found that very, very few ecovillages in the world would be ecovillages according to that definition. And we felt that actually ecovillage is more of a path than an outcome. And there are some core ingredients into that path, which are distilled in this definition that we use today. And maybe just to say a few words about, my journey with ecovillages. And many people might have heard this or know this about me because I've said it publicly in a few times before, but I was born in South Africa under apartheid. And my first introduction to community in the truest sense of the world was actually when I went on a pilgrimage. And that was it was like a personal cascade of crisis, you could say, really understanding the depth of injustice of the systems that I was a part of, not just in South Africa, but also discovering that it was actually a global system. Then being deeply disappointed in science. Both my parents were professors at the university, so very scientific. And I just realized, wow, this abstraction is not helping me make sense. And and I guess the third one was just a very deep personal thing about being lost, feeling completely and utterly lost, and feeling that the pathways that society was offering me were not making sense to me. So the need to give up on a very deep level, and I gave up on my life in a way, because I gave up on all that I had been told about who I should be and what security would mean to me, how I could stay safe in the world. And I went on a pilgrimage through South Africa just after Nelson Mandela was released and violence was at a high. And I ran into a community where white and black people live together. And that showed me how we can create the new that we're dreaming of within the old systems without fighting the existing systems. And that's been a driver for me. You know, it wasn't perfect, but I realized also over time, you know, even though apartheid has changed in South Africa, the remnants, the scars of apartheid, the trauma of apartheid is ongoing and is shaping the realities of that country. And what that community was doing, even back then, this was 1991, was actually living and healing and being with those scars. So it seems like something small, something very local, something that is not so visible on a societal surface, but actually from deep within, it heals those inner patterns of brokenness, of fragmentation that either make a strong society or weaken a society. So for me, yeah, that's the inspiration that's behind my journey. And, you know, since then it's been a 30-year journey of exploring community. Yeah,
and so you've been living in
years.
Fintorn for quite some time of that. Other communities as
Well,
well?
many. I was so after 1991, I was a nomad, as so many of our young generation are naturally. So I traveled around the world and visiting communities in the Pyrenees in France, then the kibbutzim in Israel. I went to India and visited many of the ashrams, visited Pune, but also some of the communities that were growing there. All over Europe, again, back to Africa, and traveling with the rainbow movement at that time for a while. And then as I wanted, I guess there was a settling bug in my DNA, my feminine DNA, because I fell in love with a man in Germany and I became pregnant. And that's what happens, not just to me, but to others as well. And that was the point where my nomadic life came to a radical halt. And I ended up moving to a very small community in Germany, in the forest, 25 adults, building community there, where my children were both born in a circus wagon, wild births with great midwives at the time. And it was after the children were born that I realized, you know, I want a school for my kids. I want to be more than just mother. I want to be active in the world. You know, I had all this upsurging of passion for engagement in me. And the small community was just too small for me. So I moved to the Ecovillage of Siebenlinden in Germany, which was just starting out, and became one of the pioneers of that community, building it from 15 adults, I think, when I moved in, to now it's around 170, 180 people. And I was part of that community for 11 years. And then I moved to Fintorn, where I've lived now for 10 years. But I think beside this movement through the Ecovillage, what is, in a way, as interesting as my journey into the network of Ecovillages, which started back in 2004, while still, or, you know, 1995, when Jen was founded, I was already living in this German community, and I knew that Jen was founded. And I was pregnant with my son, who was born in 1996. So I couldn't go myself. You know, I was just in that moment of landing, but I knew all about it. I heard the stories about it from my friends who came back. So I knew about Jen. I went to two of the very earliest networking meetings in Europe in the late 90s with a baby on my hip, you know, that kind of thing. And then in 2004, I was invited as an Ecovillage educator, because I'd been developing community courses, to the founding meeting of Gaia Education. And I became one of the geese who wrote the original curriculum for the Ecovillage Design Education, which was my first visit to Fintorn, and where I fell in love with my now husband, Robin Elfred, back in 2004. I went back to Germany. It took another 6 years before I actually moved here.
Wow.
But in 2008, the European gathering of Jen came to Siemlinen, to the eco-village I was staying in. And that's where I was elected as president of the European part of the network, really because of my African background, started growing the African part of the networks. And then became executive secretary of Jen Europe, then president of Jen, and then executive director or CEO of Jen. So it's been a beautiful journey, I would say, through widening circles of community.
Mm. So in that role, I can see that you've traveled to so many different villages in many different parts of the world, from villages in Africa to established eco-villages, as you're talking about, and to urban eco-villages. What are some of the key, well, it's hard to compare them really, but what are for you are some of the key insights or inspirations that you feel that eco-villages as a whole bring into the world? Is there something essential that you can access in that world?
Yes, for sure. I mean, starting from the work that we did with Gaia Education, with those founding geese, where we started crystallizing, distilling what is the core pattern of regeneration, you could say, that we can find hidden within the super diverse realities on the surface of all of these eco-villages, intentional communities, wonderful eco projects around the world. And I've traveled to, actually, I counted it the other day, I think it's been now 49 countries in the past 12 years, just working with communities and eco-villages. And I feel so deeply grateful for what it has taught me. And I guess one of the deepest insights that I've had is that this core pattern, which I'll say a bit more about in a moment, is steeped in culture. And when we set up Gaia Education, we spoke about the 4 dimensions of sustainability. And what we now call culture was called worldview. And as I traveled around, and firstly, I noticed that in many places, especially in the global south, worldview was experienced as another concept, an abstraction, a Western concept. But, and terms like spirituality carry such different, deep messages, sometimes very painful, actually, in some cultures of the world. But the word culture itself is a word of empowerment for people of diversity, where they can immediately connect to, these are our roots. This is who we are. This is where I don't need to change the color of my skin. I don't need to change the shape of my hair. I don't need to change what I wear to be who I am in my culture. And I want you to recognize who I am in the depth of my being, in the depth of where I come from. And also this recognition that people have these deep roots into sustainability and regeneration that go back through thousands of years into our ancestry, the place where all of us can go back and become indigenous again through our own ancestry, and some of us have to go back far. So that bringing out culture as both a defining aspect, but also an aspect of rich wealth of diversity. And, that's a celebration. And I would say at the heart of the impulse, the eco-village impulse, is an impulse of healing. People realizing that the culture, and this was starting I think the impulse really came up after the Second World War, but then with what some might call astrological movements, planets in the sky, age of Aquarius, where something shifted and there was a new consciousness coming out of a real awareness of the destructiveness of the mainstream culture we had been creating on the Western edge of humanity, I would call it. And deep sense that this needs to be restored. Something needs to be restored. It doesn't mean that we need to throw out technology or improvements, innovation. No, not at all. But it needs to be put at service of life. Human beings had become narcissistic, you could say, full of ourselves, seeing ourselves at the head of creation. And something about that had become so destructive. And where the cascade of crises that you're speaking about is the result of ongoing expression of those parts in ourselves. And yeah, maybe we can speak later about the fact that I believe that their root indeed is in a deep sense of self-destructiveness that each of us carries, seeds that each of us carries in ourselves. But as a whole, this destructive culture, and there was very clearly, if you look at the beginnings of Gen, but also even before that, the intentional community movement, communities like Findhorn, like Arville are more than 50 years old. And there are many, many of that generation that started. You know, not long ago, I visited for the first time Céu de Mapia, that lies in the middle of the Amazon in Brazil. Beautiful eco-village, which also was started 45 years ago with exactly the same vision, the same understanding. Mainstream culture is becoming too destructive. We need to create islands of hope, islands of healing, where we come back to our roots, where we heal relationships between everything that we are. So it's not really between humans and nature, but it's more understanding that we are immersed. We are nature. We are the planet. We don't live on the planet. We live within the fullness of life on the planet. And this interbeing is what we need to awaken to, so that we can bring our full humility and our full audacity to our dream of cultures that are conducive to life. And that is what ecovillages are. Hotspots for cultures that are conducive to life. And we've developed this map of regeneration where we have the core ecovillage principles in each of the areas. I'd invite anybody to go onto the Gen website and just check it out, because it's such a cool pattern that we can use to work with, to design, to measure impact, to refine, and beautiful expression of this core pattern that lies at the heart of every eco-village and every regenerative project, really.
So I'm wondering then, I've had experience with you exploring those that pattern through the Trainer of Trainer program, and it was a wonderful experience. And I'm doing as much as I can to share and ripple that out, and also to begin to share it in places like Africa too. But before I do that, I also wanted to ask you about, I know that you've spent a lot of time there. Often I hear maybe some comments about, the idea of eco-villages being a very Western concept, but I get a sense that it's far more than that. And your experience of it's far more than that. And the way that the concept is translated or contextualized, I mean, you're being asked by whole governments to explore the concept of eco-villages. So how have you seen the idea of eco-villages translate, and how do you see that pattern fitting well in that completely different context?
Yeah, this has been a deep part of my journey. And I guess, it's my journey with Gen is the recognition of traditional villages as eco-villages, because of course, if you look at where are the most exquisite eco-villages in the world, definitely indigenous communities are some of them, right? And there's the deep knowledge, the indigenous knowledge that goes with that, the love for place, but the love for place that is expressed through a true knowledge of place, true knowledge of the healing qualities of all the plants around us, the way and the behaviors of the animals, the flows of the rivers, and how we need to interact with these, how we need to find our place within the hoop of life, as Pat McCabe called it, to truly be guardians of life. This is basic respect, in a way, to recognize that that is the root of what we're trying to recreate, right? And so that has always been a part of Jen. For instance, in Sri Lanka, we have Sarvodaya, which is a big movement of 13,000 traditional villages, which has always been a part of Jen. And those Buddhist-inspired communities have been the first traditional ecovillages, recognized as traditional ecovillages. And from there, it's spread. We've had communities, for instance, in Senegal, calling themselves ecovillages, traditional villages, since 2000, 2001. So it's been a long time, but since 2008, we started to really bring that concept out and build it more clearly, visualize it more clearly. Somehow the Western mindset, and I guess all of our mindset, has a tendency to span the horizon a bit too narrow. And as we build, I remember us in Germany, I was hosting Ecovillage design education courses and inviting participants from around the world. And then we had wonderful people from Orissa in India, from the forest there, from the indigenous tribes, and from Africa and from Latin America come. And we would be super proud. We are growing 80% of our own vegetables in this ecovillage. And they would laugh at us and say, how come you're proud of that? That is normal. Yeah. And then we would say, and look, we're building straw bale houses with mud. And then they would kind of stop laughing and look at us a bit more gravely and say, wow, and just like even now, your colleagues are in Africa teaching us that is primitive and we should be using cement instead. What is this? Yeah, so very sobering to have these conversations across culture, but also good to see that just because it's a traditional village and an indigenous village, which is maybe ecologically much more regenerative or sustainable than we are, doesn't mean that it's completely regenerative, because many of these communities are falling apart at a very, very rapid scale, with global economy coming in, global capitalism moving in, eroding ownership of land, health of forests and rivers, and youth being drawn into the cities to earn a living. So there is a destruction and an unsustainability of traditional villages the world over. So we found that actually traditional villages, wherever they are in the world, benefit as much as intentional communities or European ecovillages from the map of regeneration. To really look at where are our strengths in terms of sustainability and regeneration, and where are actually our weaknesses. And that might be more in economy or in particular areas that we need to focus on to start thriving again as a community.
So what you're just describing there reminds me a little bit about what Helena Norberg Hodge talks about. I volunteered with her in Ladakh back in 1992 and again in 95, and she was talking about the process of counter development. So the whole process of exploring sustainable ways of building sustainable food systems, sustainable energy, sustainable clothing and really looking at how that in those cultures, there's, as you're saying, there's the drive towards modernization or to be to take the concrete or the diesel energy, whereas actually through the conversations of people saying, well, what's happening in the West is that actually that's causing destruction, and there's the old people who are getting left in homes, and there's the pollution of the rivers, and there's the synthetic clothing, and there's the damaging result of processed food. And we actually realize that we're following this path, but it's not working. And so these conversations that were starting to happen opened up a space where there could be a revaluing or a rethinking of what was progress, what is development, what does it mean, and maybe there's other options that we could choose. It's not just this one-dimensional path that you follow. And so it feels somehow that this conversation with the eco-villages is also that kind of counter development type of path, and that perhaps through that network, as well as using the tools and the patterns, it's simply through that strengthened network with people on all different parts of the world who are experiencing similar things but from different angles, that gives strength for that to continue and gives strength for governments to take a stand for regeneration. And so it kind of makes me think too about the role of that, the different types of leadership that something like Jen brings, that it's more of a mycelium network that connects the threads of this movement. And then every now and then there's these little sparks of, little fruiting bodies that pop up here and there that we see, that then, kind of explode with the spores and help to ripple out new ways of thinking in those places. But it's the strength of this mycelium network that it feels like that's kind of what's happening with Jen. And as soon as you connect in with it, there's this strength that you feel by being part of people in every part of the world who are thinking and feeling and exploring this. And it's like you're saying, you went to Brazil and there was a community that's been there for ages. And so somehow the meta network, or the linking, the relationships rather than the parts themselves, it's a very sort of systemic approach, gives rise to a new understanding or a deeper understanding. And I wondered too whether you've seen any of the eco-village concept being translated into places for displaced people or in refugee camps, and whether you've experienced that as well. It seems to be a world that I've started being involved in a lot more, particularly with the Perma youth and them connecting up with youth in refugee camps. And I just wonder whether you'd experienced anything or seen anything in a way that we can help to communicate that with the young people in these villages. As permaculture seems to be really offering a lot of hope, but I feel like there's something else as well that permaculture and eco-villages could bring to offer some positive approach.
Yeah, maybe before I come there, that was really beautiful, the whole the description also of the mycelium. I think that's a very apt description of how Jen works in the world. And I just want to say a few more words to that. For sure, Helena was also a deep inspiration, also a mentor of me in my work with the Global Ecovillage Network. She's been part of the founding circle, really, of the network. And at the same time, I question whether the use of the word counter-development is so helpful. Because there's been a lot of feedback to Jen about this. Oh, you're just going back to the past. There's a longing to go back to the past. And I think there's a natural feeling in human beings that actually there is an evolutionary development in life, and that the next generation builds on the ancestry of the past, that we take on the pain from the past. We need to integrate that, but also we have our unique time that we live in and our unique contribution to give at this time, and that this is different also. It's not just the same old, maybe on some abstract level, Taoism, we could say, it's always the same, but on another level, it's not. And my experience also working in traditional villages in the global south is that innovation is highly desired, especially by the younger generation. They are hungry for it. So how do we say, look, we're not doing this. We're not doing what surveillance capitalism is doing. This is not our path. We're not here to destroy. No, we're here to take the next step. We're humans in a way, with the beauty of our intelligence, the depth of our love, we become more refined. We heal our nervous system so that we can catch the subtle information that life is sending back to us and find more innovative, better solutions that bring back the newest of technology and combine it with the depth of what we can learn from nature. So, that kind of approach, I think, is just what I see people really waking up to. And I also understand that there is a deep criticism of the concept of development. I've mainly heard it actually from our Asian networks, where and of course the degrowth movement, this is not about growth, it's about refinement.
I really love
That's
how
what
you just expressed that then. And it's how I understand, or how I understood that term to be. And what is another term? Because that's exactly what it is. And as a matter of fact, it's also really about how permaculture presents itself in traditional communities, in indigenous communities, and definitely not about going backwards, but it's you've just expressed that beautifully. But I think it's that terminology that we often get stuck on, or that movement in the way that we want to. So I think it's good to point to that. I just was participating in a course that there was a group of us who held the Beyond Development course. So Jonathan Dawson was there, and Jason Hickel and myself and a number of other people were leading that. And so, it was called Beyond Development or Counter Development. So still using that term. So I wonder whether there's another term that you do use to explore what is a way of thinking about. It's not about, because change always happens. And as you're saying, innovation is something that we are constantly doing as we adapt and evolve and change and notice what's happening around us and find better way forwards. And so what is that term? What is that term that we use?
Yeah, I wonder whether we need a term.
Interesting.
Personally, I would say that one term like counter development, my experience has simply been that it creates a lot of misunderstandings. I agree that the term has all that in it, but there are misunderstandings around it. Yeah, I love the term innovation. I love the thought that we need to be able to imagine the future, because before we are able to live into it, so imagination, personally, I like that term. It's also the creation of magic or the creation of miracles, which I feel like we can't do without that anymore. We want to make it. Despite everything the climate scientists are telling us, we need magic. We need miracles, right? We need to dig into those magic, what we now call magic, but what I would say are deeply human gifts of attunement to the bigger rhythms of the universe and really aligning with those. We can call that magic at the power of our intention. But the word innovation, the word refinement, I love also human intelligence, collective wisdom, So it's,
Right.
Yes. And maybe I could just go on to your next question, which was about the refugee camps, right?
Yeah, let's.
That's okay. Shall I move there?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So, in Gen, we've also developed this program called Emergencies, where, and as so often in Gen, you've just spoken about the mycelium, and this mycelium is so healthy and thriving. So there's a constant innovation coming, sprouting of new solutions, new heartfelt responses to the realities that grows out of the Ecovillage movement worldwide. So we've had communities worldwide responding to disaster, natural man-made disasters around the world, where communities stepped up or said, well, we don't need to actually rebuild these communities with cement and wheat sacks that come in through global aid. We don't need to build refugee camps where people sit around in tents. We can build sustainable green architecture, very intelligently built from the local building ingredients that are around, intelligently designed through permaculture, through eco-village design. We can support people to start growing their food. Actually, growing our own food, I think, is one of the first and best ways of starting to heal trauma, because it reconnects us to the earth. It connects our nervous systems to plants. We watch the growth in plants, and that actually has a beautiful effect also on our nervous systems, on our grounding and just rebalancing. So all of these are, the whole eco-village design is starting to be implemented in refugee camps. For instance, in Bangladesh, our teams are currently working in the refugee camps there. And, as you say, this is, I think, an area that will be needed more and more in the future. Mm. While at the same time, also just to mention that many of the European eco-villages have had a deep engagement with refugees streaming into Europe over the past decade, offering programs, official programs, sometimes in close collaboration with municipality, or just through engagement, reaching out to the local spaces, building friendships, supporting community building, cultural celebrations, etc. So engaging in many different ways. Yeah, and definitely eco-village design is one of the ingredients, I think, that can transform refugee camps to places where people might actually arrive and start building home. As long as people are not able to come home again, they cannot truly start to regenerate their lives in all aspects, right? So it's a limbo, and that has a detrimental effect on everyone.
It's a very long limbo too. The communities that I'm currently working with, one woman, Sakina, has been for 12 years in a camp, and we, like you were saying, the Ecovillages is hosting refugees. We hosted some Bhutanese refugees who spent 18 years in refugee camp in Nepal before they finally came out to Australia. And so these are, they're not, like, there are some that are short term, but the more that we look at these camps, we can see how actually, there's children who are growing up there, that's their only reality that they have ever known. And one of the things I've started responding to with some of the groups that we're working with there is they're saying that they are dependent on aid for food, and with this current crisis, that half of their food aid was chopped because of the problems with distribution. And so there's massive hunger and malnutrition happening there right now. And the World Food Programme has said something like 265 million people will be on the brink of starvation by the end of the year. And so beginning with, simple things as food gardens and connecting communities through those has seemed to be like a good first point to begin with anyway, and things are rippling out. So I'm so excited to hear about the emergency. I have heard about that before, but for some reason I hadn't made the link with the work that I'm doing with that. So that's kind of something that I'm definitely going to be following up on, which is fantastic, and it's really exciting. I mean, the thing is that the work that you've been doing with Jen has really reached out to so many different groups and so many different communities and cultures and people with different needs. And I'm wondering if you could just briefly comment too on how you see the eco-village movement relating to urban-suburban context, because the other comment that I hear quite often in Australia, because most people relate to eco-villages as being, the Crystal Waters or the Jarlin Bars or the more rural eco-villages. What's been your sense of how we can apply this thinking to highly urbanized environments, say, for example, Seoul or Hong Kong or even inner London, for example?
Well, I feel like it is already being applied, right? And I think you'll agree. In terms of one of the core principles of Jen is the reconnecting to nature, the learning from nature, the being in nature, being part of nature. So that is a key, and in a way, it doesn't matter whether you live in a flat or you live in the countryside. But personally, I believe that without a connection to nature, we cannot be healthy. Mm-hmm. And whether we find that through our connection to the little piece of sky that we can look at through our window, or we take our courage, and I think also with the food issue and food production issue and distribution issue that has become so evident through COVID, the run on shops worldwide and people afraid, but also the wonderful experience of people like me who for the first time since 12 years have not been able to travel. And I am, just the health that is returning to my body from not being in airplanes. And I'm just realizing that, wow, this turnaround is not just for now. This is going to stay with me. I suddenly feel like, okay, I didn't travel for 7 years when I was more radically ecological before everybody else stopped flying. Daniel Val and I were speaking about this just the other day. We both had like a 7-year phase of not flying when most other people were still flying. And then as other people stopped flying, I actually started flying. And I said, this is important to build that mycelium. And I had good reasons. It was immensely enriching in all directions. However, in the past years, I've just felt a greater discrepancy between my talk and my fly. So there's a part of me that is just so delighted myself to have come back to Findhorn. I've now spent 99 days in Findhorn with my husband, which is the longest I've ever spent here in one go, and the longest I've spent with my husband in one go, because we're both traveling all the time. We were both traveling all the time. And the benefit that has brought, is that after 15, 17 years, for the first time, I have grown my own food. Mm-hmm. And the simple joy of transforming my living room into a greenhouse and a small patch of garden into a vegetable patch. And I learned from my wonderful colleague from Zambia, who you have to interview if you haven't already, Mugova, founder of the Greening School project there, who taught me very early on, no flower bed should be flowers. It should all be vegetables, vegetables, flower as well, plant your pumpkin plants. I've just got a whole beautiful, my big flower bed is all peas and pumpkins and strawberries, and it's flowering, right? It's wonderful. Beautiful, but not just that, it's producing. Yes. And the joy of eating healthy food. So this is, yes, that's hard to do in the center of London, but you can grow some herbs on your windowsill, even in London. That little bit of watering that it takes. You can grow a small, there's small tomato plant varieties that you can grow on your windowsill. I've just been amazed. I have one cucumber. No, I have 2 cucumber plants. They grow, quite big, but in a bit of a living room, you can grow a cucumber plant. I've had more than 20 cucumbers from one cucumber plant. So, what we can do in towns. And then, of course, there's the whole roof greening, that all the roofs should be green roofs. Vertical gardening, which we've learned from Joubert when I was very young. How do we do gardening in bags that is vertical rather than horizontal? Urban guerrilla farming, taking back the land, planting vegetables around the trees in the street, so there's so many ways, but also close relationships. Oh, before I come to that, just to say, so Ecovillage is about bringing the village back. Even the word village, just like the word rural, if you really listen to it, you notice it has a put down energy to it, which was inserted. Yeah. We need to free the word again from that energy, because village is about relationship. Village is like Ubuntu. I am because you are. It takes a village to raise a child. No mother should be isolated with her children in a flat. No mother, no child should be isolated with their mother in a flat. It's terrible living circumstances. Yeah. So building community where we are, wherever we are. And that's the core mantra that Jen has been speaking about also with the online summit. building community wherever you are. Start speaking to your neighbors. Find out who else is interested in the same stuff. Go speak to your mayor, to your municipality. Find out who else is supportive. Build networks, build alliances. Start changing your small neighborhood. Start changing the bigger neighborhood. And then build relationships between the urban centers and the rural communities to have your kids go out for weekends. Get your vegetables from out there, so build those alliances that allow organic farmers outside the city to have a simple box system where they can sell where you have fresh vegetables. This is our life. And it's ours to design. And there is no reason why we should be living a life that is not true to our innermost ethical alignment. This life is too precious to live it out of alignment with our own hearts. It's too precious. Life is too precious. So just go for it. The Ecovillage principles are as applicable to urban community as they are to rural community.
And I also see that that the Ecovillage concept is presented now as a direct response to the climate crisis as well. So all of the major crises that we're facing in the world, the Ecovillage provides a direct and practical way that we can address that. And is there something that you can just speak briefly about how Ecovillages and climate change connect?
Yeah, I've said before, the heart of Ecovillage is a healing impulse between humans and the world to close the gap, to understand again, we are interbeing, find our place in the hoop of life. So, of course, it's a healing response to any of the crises, you could say, that are happening. And, that might sound arrogant, but it's also, with all humility, the research that is running in communities, right? And communities are not perfect at all. The opposite is true. As soon as we say, I'm dedicated to healing, all the other stuff, all the shadow stuff shows up for healing, right? So communities are not easy places. This is not an easy process. It's not a comfortable journey we're on. However, it's really easy to measure and show how ecovillages respond in terms of the impact of ecovillages, in terms of both the Sustainable Development Goals and the climate agreements, how ecovillages restore ecosystems, how ecovillages sequester carbon, how ecovillages reduce waste, how they teach peace communication, education for sustainable development. All of these aspects, many more, gender equality, there's no end to it, like new forms of social entrepreneurship, new forms of currencies that have been often pioneered in some of the old ecovillages and now are spreading everywhere. So as you say, I think it's really important while we say, ecovillages are hotspots for this. We're actually bringing out a bigger version of an ecovillage impact assessment of 100 ecovillages this year. So we'll be bringing the proof to COP26. We've been very present at the United Nations climate conferences over the past 10 years. But we're bringing out this report to COP26. We brought a similar report, but only of 30 ecovillages in 2017, which was amazing, showcasing that 98 of all ecovillages restore ecosystems, 97% actually sequester carbon. We have the lowest measured ecological footprint in the Northern Hemisphere in ecovillages. So all of these things are already showcased.
And it's such an important document. Yeah. It's such important to have that data, isn't it? To be able to then take that to take the next step. And I also saw that your new series of, or your updated series of Ecovillage cards blend with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes.
And can you just maybe mention that briefly and let people know too how they can get a hold of the resources that Gen has and how they can get involved as well in Gen.
Yeah, so we've got resources that have really grown from the communities in our network, deep learning. And as I said before, this map of regeneration with the Ecovillage principle started growing back in 2004 and has continually evolved. We brought it into card form 4 or 5 years ago, which was a long process. And then I've traveled with them to all these different countries and getting feedback. No, this doesn't work for us. This doesn't work for us. So we now have a global set of cards that represent the Ecovillage principles, the next version. And each of the principles, I mean, I have a few here, I could just, so, this is, for instance, one. So you can see this is in the area of ecology. And it's increase biodiversity and restore ecosystems. This is one, or here's one from social, so this is one of the principles in the social realm. There you go, nurture diversity and cohesion for thriving communities. So this is what they look like, and we've now just checked on how each of them, which are the actual sustainable development goals that link to each of them, we've developed as self-assessment. So with simple questions, which are also printed on the back of the new cards. So all of this has been in development and has right now been launched. It's available on Gen's website. And we've also developed through the years something which is completely new, but has been developed. Well, it's only coming out now for the first time. I'm just actually in the process of delivering the first workshop on the journey of regeneration. So with these cards, as I said, Ecovillage is not an outcome, it's a process. So the journey of regeneration is based in seed form in the hero's journey, but completely transforms that to a journey of regeneration, which is community-based, based on broken humanity, not heroes, but the beauty of our brokenness, and out of that create community, togetherness, alliances, and to work together to unfold a new future. So the journey of regeneration, where we'll also be bringing out the cards and the description. And all of that people can get on the Gen website, ecovillage.org, very easily.
Fantastic. And so you'll be running another summit as well at some point. Is that on the cards, or?
That's definitely on the cards. As you know, I'm actually stepping out of my role as CEO of Gen, which is very exciting for me. I said right at the beginning, I described briefly my journey through widening circles, and I think it's an ongoing journey. So I've now been, I tend to do things in 7-year cycles, and I've been building Gen, the global part of the movement, for the past 7 years. So I might not host the next Gen Summit. I've grown these summits in Gen. I don't know. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I anticipate that it will become a participatory summit held by the whole network. But let's see. I'd be also delighted to still play a role in it. And the summit has been an amazing way of just, as you say, spoke about the mycelium, to bring these patterns that we use out to more and more people. We find the feedback, especially now also after COVID or during COVID, is stronger than ever before, of people just longing to build community, seeing the importance of community for resilience. And we're becoming more and more able to respond to that in ways that is appropriate. Yeah, and I myself, maybe to just say, I'm moving on to work more directly on the issue of collective and transgenerational trauma in my next role.
Oh, I wish you all the best in that, and thank you for everything that you've brought to the Eco-Village movement, and as a pioneer and a leader and a holder of a space for so much to happen. it's just been amazing. I've been involved in Gen, from the beginning, but I've in the middle too, like what you said, had a family, and so your interaction, it changes when you're doing that, and so it's really wonderful to sort of come back in and reconnect with Jan and to feel the absolute change that you've brought into Jan, and how it's touched lives and communities in a way that is so important and brings a sense of connection and value to so much about the regenerative culture that that we need to shine a light on right now, and invite people to participate in. And I know that Jen has groups in different parts of the world. There's the global Jen, then there's regional Jen networks, and then there's country-based Jen networks, and then even community regional, bi-regional things happening. So I guess you can tap into all of that by looking at the Global Ecovillage Network website, which is ecovillage.org. You said that? That's right.
That's right.
That's right. Yep. And so I'll put all the
right.
links down below for that. And is there anything else that we needed to let people know about the resources? Any of the workshops or events or things like that? There's educational programs that are ongoing that they can tap into?
Well, there's so much happening that it's not possible really to even go into it. But I think if people just go to that website, you can just click your way through it and you'll find your way to the regions. There's a map of ecovillages where you can check what are the ecovillages close to me, but also definitely go to the regional websites. You can link into your region. You can go and visit an ecovillage close to you. You can sign up as a volunteer, if you would like to translate some of our materials to your language and thereby get to know it more deeply. That's a beautiful way. And we just launched a new educational platform for online education. It's called learn.ecovillage.org. So also very easy to find, and people can go and see there the next upcoming courses. Great. So it's exciting. It's a journey. And in my experience, once you start, you never stop. And I just want to say thank you, Morag. Thank you so much for holding this space, for spreading messages of hope, but also really practically with the permaculture work, which is such a deep root of all ecovillage design, that you're spreading through your networks. And it's wonderful how these networks also intersect to strengthen the mycelium of regenerative cultures. So delight to be here with you. Thank you for doing what you do in the world.
Thank you, Kosha. Take care in your new journey. So thanks for tuning in to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast today. It's been a real pleasure to have your company. I invite you to subscribe and receive notification of each new weekly episode with more wonderful stories, ideas, inspiration, and common sense for living and working regeneratively. And call positive permaculture thinking and design into action in this changing world. I'm including a transcript below and a link also to my 4-part permaculture series, really looking at what is permaculture and how to make it your livelihood too. So join me again in the next episode where we talk with another fascinating guest. I look forward to seeing you there.